seminar will be on Ashley's return in the relationship to the Hawkins rifle. Was everybody here yesterday, or are there any new people? New? Okay. So I'll kind of read, this is part 3 of the trip, so I'll kind of bring you up to date of where we're at today. So William Ashley and Andrew Henry owned a fur company and hired 100 men to go up the Missouri and trap for them. Well, they had problems when they were trying to deliver supplies, and they were actually had delivered some and come back because the Indians were able to shoot at him from up on the cliffs and the high banks, but he couldn't reach them shooting back. They're down on the river. So he went to Samuel Hawkins, Jacob, and said, hey, I need a super Hawkins built. So that they did. They built him a 69 caliber, over an inch barrel, 1 ounce balls it fired, and longer barrel. I think it was, what, 3.5 feet. And so a little bit about Ashley and the fur company. In 1825, his men had not been supplied for a couple of years, so he took it upon himself to travel out west, and actually he left in 1824, November, December, traveled through the winter from Fort Atkinson, which is north of St. Louis here on the river, and traveled through South Pass. And in 1825, it took him a year, he had a 1-day rendezvous, and he resupplied his men, and he gathered all the furs they had trapped over that period of time. So Ashley had this rendezvous just north of the Utah border into Wyoming, in what is present day a little town called Lone Tree, I'm sorry, I say that all the time, Lone Tree. And there's a bench of land on there where he had this rendezvous. So when he left with 60 men and horses and all the furs, and they traveled by horse all the way up north just into Montana. And here on Grapevine Creek, most of the men returned with the horses, and they harvested 24 buffalo to build buffalo hide boats and take his men and the hides back. And they went right here from Grapevine Creek, which is on the Bighorn River. They took the Bighorn River up to the Yellowstone here, and then the Yellowstone all the way up to North Dakota. And then this is where he met a military contingency of keel boats that were headed by Atkinson and O'Fallon, who were commissioned by the government to go up the river and make treaties with the Indians, who were constantly harassing the supply boats going on up the river to resupply the men and trappers up here in the trapping area. So it's still not really known, but Ashley knew Atkinson, so it was always a question, was it just happened so he was there, or was it pre-planned? But anyways, when Ashley got here and met Atkinson and O'Fallon, they ditched the hide boats, threw their furs onto the keel boats, and most of them went on one called the Muskrat, which when returning actually sank twice in the shallow river, and they were able to repair it and get back the furs. So after a week of rest here, and Ashley, his men, and Atkinson and Fallon and the military group went back to St. Louis, and Ashley actually became a millionaire in his first haul in those days' terms. Myself, Pancho, Mitch, Lucky, Messmer, and Amish, Staggs, we all share a relationship in studying the fur trade. And we were at a week-long rendezvous up in the mountains, and I was talking to Lucky, and I said, hey, I'd like to do a ride. And we always watched guys that rode into the rendezvous, but we'd never seen anybody leave a rendezvous on horseback. So I was studying Ashley, and I said, let's follow Ashley's trail. Let's do this. He says, well, I'm just getting ready to retire. I'm in. So after I was home, talking to my neighbor here, Amish, shooting some pool, I was telling him about it. He goes, well, I'll go. So we took 2.5 years to put this trip together, training, building equipment, building tack, and doing logistics, finding places to store our horse and trailer so when we were finished with the ride, we could get on the river. So after 2.5 years, we finally trailered out to this location in Lone Tree, Wyoming, and we began the journey. And we rode 700 miles up to Montana, and we were just short of getting into Montana because this is Crow Indian Reservation here, and they would not allow us to cross their land to get to the Bighorn River and Grapevine Creek, where Ashley had harvested the buffalo and built his boats. So we had to go around that area. We did. Then after waiting for some other guys that were going to do this part of the trip with us, we got on the Bighorn River with a buffalo hide boat we built on the bank, and a couple of period correct wooden pirogues that were built in Louisiana. And we used pirogues instead of just all buffalo hide boats because we're traveling through modern day, and we did not have the ability to harvest buffalo along the way to replenish our hides if we needed to. We did have to carry some dried foods that we had along the way, and because Ashley had hunters that traveled with him, they constantly were killing fresh meat every day that they could eat. And although we had tried with DNR in several states here to allow us to do this, we were turned down, so we had to, of course, survive with dried foods we could take along. But as we traveled, there was so much support from people who knew what we were doing, and even the word got ahead. People would present us with elk meat, antelope meat, all kinds of foods, and we still think that maybe today we could have done this trip and never took any food, so that was really neat. So the last 2 days we talked about the horseback ride. We had a lot of sketches that were taken during this trip, and then the river trip on the buffalo hide boat, the pirogues, all the way to North Dakota. And then we had a brother in our organization who, after we had already planned to take bull boats all the way down, because we didn't have a keel boat, we were at camp a couple of years before we started this, and he said, I'll build a keel boat. I've got it on my bucket list. Of course, we kind of laughed, like, who's got a building a keel boat on their bucket list? But he's a master woodworker, and I said, so you built a boat before? And he said, no. So I think, we're going to put our lives and our gear on this boat and go down to Missouri. So I'll let Gerry talk more about him building the keel boat and where we're picking it up today, where we met him on the Missouri in the part of the river that keel boats could navigate and to St. Louis. So Gerry, I'll get that ready for you.
So there's a lot to cover. We're going to get to some slides that we can talk about in an hour. But for those that weren't here in the previous 2 days seminars, this journey that we did was 700 miles on horseback, 400 in the bull boat and the canoes, and then 900 on the keel boat. Today we're going to talk about the keel boat, and if you're from the area and you track the Missouri River, 2019 we made the journey. The Missouri River was massively flooded. It was 22 feet above flood stage, and we decided we were going to go anyways because we wanted to do the whole trip from start to finish and not put off the keel boat part for another year. So they're kind of hard to see. So I'll kind of talk about it, but the keel boat that's over there, that's the keel boat we used, and when Bill Bailey, the barn and cabin builder, decided to build a boat, he consulted with Mitch and some other guys that build keel boats that are for tourism on the Missouri River. But he said, I don't want to build one to modern specs, because a lot of those, for insurance coverages and taking tourism, it's a whole different story. He said, I want to build it true to 1825. So he began digging into books and shipbuilding and Butch had books, and they went through them, and he built this boat true to 1825 standards. So it's all, he had to figure out the moisture content and the ship flap on the sides, and then based on the moisture content, how far apart you put them, and then you go in between with oakum and tar and everything else, and then when it goes to water, it swells up and closes. There's calculations that boat builders use to do that, and he did that, and he also did this boat for a year. It took him to build it on the road. And what I mean is, Bill, as a business, redoes barns and cabins and things. So he will leave his house and he'll go to somebody's barn for 30 or 45 or 60 days to redo your historic barn. And at the same time, he's got this keel boat on that trailer that it's on, and he'll work for the customer from 8 to 5, have dinner, and then he'll work on it from 6 to midnight or until he can't stay awake anymore. So he didn't just build it true to 1825 standards, he built it down the road on a trailer. Turned it over, built the hull, turned it back over, and then worked on the top, building it up. And just like the keel boats in 1825, we can attest, it leaked from the top, the bottom, the sides, everywhere. We spent a lot of time every night patching holes, retarring things, and getting that thing to float. So there's a portion of Ashley's trip that we couldn't do. When you get up to the upper part of the Missouri River, there's 5 lakes and dams, and these are river boats, they're not lake boats. So even though we talked to marinas who would help us take it around and portage around, they're like, it's too dangerous, we know what you're in, and you'll never make it, you'll sink on the first lake. So there's no sense of doing something that Ashley didn't do on a lake that didn't exist, and portaging around the dam that didn't exist. And the other thing is, if you put it in the water and you take it out for 2 or 3 days to portage, it's going to start to dry up, and then it's not going to swell back up and be waterproof, and you're just going to do that over the course of 5 dams and 5 portages. So we got on the boat in Yankton, South Dakota, and launched from there. Shaking? Oh, somebody back there. And we launched from Yankton, South Dakota, which is the first 3 or 4 days is the only spot on the Missouri River that's the way it was when Ashley was there. It's still, a sort of braided river. You have all of the trees and obstacles in the water, and then, about 3 days into the ride, it starts to canalize and turns into the Corps of Engineers, 300 yards wide and 50 or 60 feet deep. But this particular, when we left the first portion, after we made about 25 miles the first day, and then the second day, we were coming down and turning a bend, and just as we came into the bend, a massive fog came over the river and just blacked out everything, if you will, with the fog. And so we're drifting with the current. We're all up there on the keel boat with poles, and Amish is on the bow. He can't even see the shore. He can't see anything in front of him. Visibility was less than from here to the fireplace, and that went for about 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours or so before we broke out of that. So pretty stressful, really, because there's a picture that we're going to show, if it'll show up on here, that kind of puts the muskrat in perspective to the Missouri River. So we managed to navigate through that. It made it down through. Can you go back one? I guess it's not going to show. Yeah. Okay, here's some of the snags and deadfalls coming into the fog, and I think the next picture will show a little bit off the bow. There's a picture off the bow. You can't see a thing. And so there we are. We have no idea where the banks are, and we did end up pushing snags off the poles and maneuvering around them. It's pretty scary. To be honest, it's just done a lot of crazy things in the Army, and this was like, you think it's a big boat, and the Missouri River just go whoop, and you're gone and buried. So after we got past that, then we started to get into the canalized waters, and then that's when the flood stage really kicked in, and the water just kept going up and up and up every single day, which actually for us turned out to be a blessing in a couple of ways. One, when the Missouri River's at normal levels, okay, see the arrow? point that arrow
It's
on
on.
this.
It's on.
So put it in perspective, that little thing right there, that's our boat. That's the keel boat, and then, you know, Missouri River. And if you go on to the internet, you just put in Muskrat Vimeo, there's a drone above us that really puts it in perspective how really tiny we are on the keel boat Muskrat. But as the flooding started to pick up, it's kind of a blessing, because when the Missouri River's at normal levels, there's the wing dams that stick out for erosion control. And with the keelboat Muskrat, you know, we had to have, you have to have a motor, and you have to have, well, let me go over that. So to put it to license it, put on the Missouri River, you have to have an automatic bilge system, you have to have a motor, you have to have an emergency radio, weather radio, first aid kit, red and green lights, and a bathroom. So a bucket. But you have to have all those things. But the motor we had was a 1982 Evinrude long shaft, barely ran, and it really was just to steer the boat, because we only had 2 oars on this. Original keel boats were 2.5 times that size. They would have 6 oars to 12 oars per side. But we couldn't find 12 crazy people to go row for us, so we had with 2 oars. And the oars we used as much as we could, and then the motor was just enough, maybe a mile or 2 over the current, to be able to turn the keel boat and maneuver it. But if we had to maneuver around the wing dams, that would have been very difficult, because you got to come in and land, you know, and then get back out and around them as fast as you can to get in the center of the river. So we were able to just float over the top of everything without having to worry about the wing dams. And for us, you know, the Missouri River in 1825 was, you know, a mile wide and 3 feet deep. And for us, it was a mile wide and 60 feet deep. Because of the flooding, you could look right and left, sometimes for as much as a half mile either way, and see flooding. So it was crazy. And the other good thing about it was, this was stop 2 or 3. Let me cut in on this one. So how many of you guys have read books about traveling on the Missouri River and the mountain men and mosquitoes? I can tell you that today the mosquitoes are as bad as they were in 1825. And this was one of our stops, and I had the bright idea of sleeping on the top of the cabin, thinking the breeze would keep the mosquitoes off, and oh no, that doesn't work. So you wake up every morning with a pockmarked face, and by lunch they go away, and you repeat that every single night. But the other good thing about the flooding was, once we got past and into the canalized areas, there was no boats. We didn't see hardly any boats. In fact, one barge before they shut barging down, and I don't even think we saw another private boat for the next 800 miles. We were the only ones on the river. Except for one time we were floating down the river, and this boat with twin 350s comes flying up alongside us, and he pulls up, and he's this game cop. We think, okay, this is it, we're done, they're gonna throw us off the river. And he looks up at Pancho and he says, "Where you boys headed?" And he looks down with all serious faces and said, "St. Louis." And the guy laughs and goes, "No, really, where are you going?" Jack's like, "No, really, we're going to St. Louis." And he got serious. He's like, "You're not kidding, are you?" And we're like, "No." So he lashed off the side of us. We told him what we were doing. And he basically handed us a business card and said, "If you need anything, get a hold of me, and good luck." And took off. And that was the only other boat we saw for about 800 miles. So, very interesting. We stopped at Fort Osage, which was a major traffic post along the way, and there's a lot of folks there. It was really neat landing a keel boat, you know, at a location that, you know, after Ashley, the keel boat would have landed. And to kind of back up as well, we started this journey on July 6th, 2019. Ashley started on July 2nd. He finished on October 4th, and we finished on October 8th. So we took the same amount of days to do the journey. And when the 3 of us finished the canoe portion and landed at Fort Union at the confluence of the Missouri River, we landed the same afternoon of the same day, August 19th, that William Ashley landed. And we spent the same 5 days at that location that his men spent while he went up the river. And none of that was planned, it's just all happenstance. So we continued down the river on the keel boat, repairing it every night, and just lost my train of thought. I was going to talk about the next event, the next crazy one. But anyways, to to lead off of that, if you look at that boat, it's, I think, 35 feet, 32, 33 feet, somewhere in there. And on the Missouri River, you get the snags under the water, like a tree, it's a cottonwood or something that's down there. And every once in a while, they'll break loose, and then it creates a void, and the water drops, creates a whirlpool, and then the water comes back up. And one of those snags happened to release right in front of the keel boat, dropped the whole keel boat about 6 feet down, and as we came up, it turned the whole boat 90 degrees and sat us back in the water. And then we had to correct and go downstream. And it's just things like that that you go, how did we survive that and this boat not go down? It's 5,500 pounds dry, probably about 9,000 pounds with all of our gear and men on it. And we came out of that one. Then a couple days later, going down the river, and you know, the engine cuts out and it's really heavy flooding. We have no control with the oars and the rudder trying to control it. And the boat, we just, you know, at some point you realize you can't control the thing. So we all grabbed poles and we just let the boat drift into shore and crashed into deadfalls and whirlpools and things. And we had to lash that off to shore, and then Amish figured out what was wrong with the motor to get it going, and then try to get back out on the river again. And that's a good sketch. It's kind of visible. But it was just day in, day out. And what Jack was talking about, the angels along the way, just like with the horse ride, kind of not so much with the canoe trip, but with the keel boat, every time we stopped and people heard about us, the next town, the next city, the next village said, hey, there's a keel boat coming. There's these crazy guys on a flooded Missouri River. You got to see this shit. You ain't going to believe it. And they would come down to the banks and they would see us and they would bring us food, and we would talk to them about it. And you know, if one, we happened to land at Little Creek off of a city with no intention of doing anything other than resting and sleeping, and it happens to be the Applejack Festival in Nebraska City. It was their Applejack Festival. Yeah, here we are. This is it. Next thing we know, they're whisking us off to the Lewis and Clark Center. They're putting us on a keel boat of Butch Bouvier's. We're going down the road in a parade. A city of 7,000 gets 100,000 people in there. You know, so we're up on top of their Butch's boat, firing off our guns in the parade and scaring the judges and having a good time. It was just everybody along the way just knew we were coming. And I think people wanted to see if we could make it to the next stop of the flooding. At one point, we had to pull over. There was what was the tributary coming in that flooded with the railroad? Huh?
The Grand River.
The Grand River. So are we coming up on that?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, the Grand River had, with all the flooding, there was a Norfolk Southern Railroad line that went across the river right by the mouth of the Missouri River, and it was backed up a quarter mile with debris. And we had heard about this, and so we pulled off to the shore, and that's Nebraska City. We pulled off to the shore, we took all our gear off because we figured if the debris came down and crushed the boat, we'd at least save our gear. So some crazy Norfolk Southern guy went out there and cut the tracks on both sides because they wanted to release the bridge so they could rebuild it and save the abutments on shore. And all that debris came floating by us, and during the middle of the night, a local guy was there with his truck and headlights on the river and an island of railroad tracks and, you know, railroad ties and everything, probably 3 times the length of our boat and twice as wide was floating by. And so the next day we had to load back up and chase all that debris down the river, pushing it off with sticks. We got into Omaha. It was flooding really bad. There's nowhere to land. The only place to land was a marina right in downtown Omaha City, and there was flash flood watches going on upstream from us, so we thought, we got to get off the river. So we get off the river, and I'll never forget this. We're coming into land, and as we're coming down on River Right is the marina. We have to come down, you know, into the opening and then bring the keel boat in and bring it up to the pier. And I'm on the bow with a rope, and Amish is on the stern with a rope. And as we're drifting in, there's this beautiful Veterans Memorial. You know, statues, all the wars, flagpoles. It's like 6 feet underwater. And I'm standing on the bow and I'm looking at this thing. And all I can think is, how the hell are we going to pay for that when we destroy it with this keel boat? And it's got about, you know, we're about from here to that pole from it. And Bill turned the boat and brought it in. And oh yeah, this is a video if you can see it. We're going to play, this is the bridge breaking upstream from us. This is after a wild man got paid a lot of money to cut the tracks. They're bending. Here it goes. See that? Did you hear what he said? I hope they don't have that boat in there. They're talking about us being downstream from us. It's a lifetime deal here, he said. So all that debris came floating right downstream past us. We landed probably around just before dusk, and that all came through right about midnight. And then the next morning we had to follow that down the river. And then a few days later we're going traveling down the river. Remember, it's 22 feet above flood stage. So on the bridges they have foot markers. And we're coming up to a railroad bridge, and some of the railroad bridges on the Missouri have that center section that opens to let ships pass, barges and stuff. So as we're coming down to one of those particular bridges, it's closed. And you can see the waterline marker is 88 feet. And the opening is probably only 6 feet. So if we go under that, it's going to take the top right off the keel boat and probably sink us and bury us in the river. So we had to do an emergency landing off to the side, probably 1/8 of a mile from the bridge, just in time. And then we all walked into town and just started talking to people, and we found a railroad guy, and he was a couple hours away, so we had to wait for him, and he actually came down and opened the trestle for us and let us through. Another time when we thought they're just going to shut us down. Yeah, go back to that one. That's a great, back one. That's a great picture of the keel boat. I have no idea where that is. Somewhere on the banks of the Missouri. And then one of the, is Paul up here, Paul Fenwald, is not, he's down there. One of the things we want to talk about is every city that we stopped at and met people. Bill Bailey, the shipbuilder, the muskrat builder, wanted to donate the keel boat to somebody for a museum about the Missouri River and to keep it alive and to keep educating people. Very surprising to us. I'm from back east, but and I know about the river and the trade history and expansion because of my passion for history. But there's a lot of people that don't know about the Missouri River. They don't really understand the Missouri River of today is not what it was back then, and they don't realize all the trade and commerce that came up the Missouri River for the Western expansion. So every city we would go to, we would ask if they wanted to house the muskrat long-term and do a museum. And we finally, then we got, yeah, maybe, no, I don't think so. We got to Herman, Missouri, and that mayor said yes. I didn't even talk to the board members, but I'm telling you, yes, we'll take it. So the keelboat muskrat, there's a guy down there at the table named Paul Fenwald, who's an absolute rock star with his keelboat. They are going to house it at Herman, Missouri. They're doing fundraisers to put up a pavilion, to put it under it. Eventually they want to enclose it and have a museum. And the museum is not just about the keelboat and our trip at all. It's a bigger picture. It's an education of keelboats and steamships, everything on the Missouri River, and to educate people on how important the Missouri was to Western expansion and the growing of our country. So to get a chance to talk to Paul, he's formed the Muskrat Society. It's $20 a year. They do fundraisers, and they have a home for it in Herman where it can live its life and continue to educate people. Really great cause. Yes?
I think this is one of the TV coverages.
Yeah, go ahead and play it. Yep. It's a very long journey.
On board this tiny keelboat docked along the Missouri River at Hartville.
This is an exact half-scale replica
of the original muskrat.
Our 7 mountain men reliving a journey that dates back to 1825.
And in here would have been where beaver hides were kept.
Like William Ashley, an entrepreneur from St. Louis who set up the first rendezvous of the fur trade era, their trip started on horseback in Wyoming. From there, they floated down the Bighorn and Yellowstone rivers before hitting the Missouri River, where, as the story goes, Ashley met General Henry Atkinson, who had a fleet of boats.
And he threw his hides and men onto the flotilla and then floated down in the keel boats to St. Louis, where he sold his furs and made quite a significant sum of money and then went into politics.
Gerry Messmer and his gang are 2 months into the 2,000-mile journey that began in July. They have no support vehicles or help along the way. The men only eat what they can carry.
We've been living on the ground for over 2 months now, sleeping on the ground and just eating dry food. And our substitute for being able to hunt is people along the way have given us elk meat, antelope meat.
The toughest part of the trip, steering clear of Mother Nature.
We've had tornadoes overhead, 80-mile-an-hour winds, torrential rains, and then here in the Missouri River, as you know, being from Kansas City, this is a very dangerous river right now with the waters being so high.
We take a lot for granted back home.
Scott Amish Staggs is one of the other men on the boat. He says he now has a greater respect for the men who came before him.
We know that we're going home shortly. Those guys, that was every day for them.
As modern-day mountain men, life is always an adventure, and this expedition was about preserving their history and keeping their traditions alive.
We look to be in St. Charles on October 8th.
Zach Summers, Fox 4 News.
So we ended up getting quite a bit of coverage. We didn't want that. We're just 3 guys that said, let's do a trip. We just kind of want to sneak through the country and get out there. But the more people found out really how crazy we were and what we were doing, how crazy it was, they wanted to come down and see us and see if this was for real. It was neat. And like he said, everything that we took was true to 1825. All of our gear was hand sewn by us or somebody. Our saddles, our tack, handmade and true to 1825. And that's a real test. You know, you got to be able to make buckskin pants that are going to last, and shirts that are going to last, buttons that aren't going to fall off. You got to be able to sew very well. And there's a lot of, for people that weren't here the last 2 days, a lot of test trips, canoe trips, horseback trips, you know, hiking trips, just to test gear, see what worked, didn't work. You know, I started off with a 1-gallon copper canteen. Well, that's not going to work on a horse because when it's on one side, it's offset in your saddle, and if it's on the left side, your right foot hurts like heck the next morning, and then you move it, so then you end up with 2 half-gallon canteens straddling the saddle, and you just, they're pirogues. When they got the pirogues, they were delivered just a couple of days before, and they had dried and split, so they had to patch those and get those, you know, water-worthy, you know, the last minute just before we left. And this is Fort Osage, right? Yep, Fort Osage, which is a major trading post that we stopped at. I think we spent 2 days there. A lot of rain at Fort Osage. And then we continued down to Herman, and I'm going to kind of wrap up with a couple more things, and then we'll get into some questions and answers. But after Fort Osage, we continued down the river, just making day by day. It was very, very quiet, very serene. Nobody on it. You know, if you can imagine the Missouri River with nobody on it. For people that fish it, it's generally a zoo. But we had the 3 of us, Captain Bill, that did the whole keelboat section, and then we had different people that would come on and off and join us along the way and do certain segments of the keelboat. But the most we ever had on it was 7 people. With 7, it's pretty crowded. There's a lot of gear and a lot of stuff to move on and off the boat every day. But that was about the max. And kind of one of the very interesting events about the keelboat journey was when we stopped at St. Charles, just a few miles short of St. Louis, because we didn't want to get into commercial traffic. And we pulled into St. Charles, and my wife was on the shore, and there's this little lady, she's probably in her 70s or 80s, and she comes over and she says, "What's going on, dear?" And so my wife starts telling her about the keelboat and our journey and all that, and she goes, "Oh, I know all about that." For those of you who know John Poulter, she was the 4th great-granddaughter of John Coulter, direct descendancy. She was born in Coulter, and her great-grandfather was John Coulter, the mountain man, with Lewis and Clark, found Yellowstone and all that. That was her great-grandfather. And she just happened to wander down when we were landing. We did have Bill. At one point, we got close to Fort Leavenworth. He thought he was having a heart attack, emergency landing, had to get him to a hospital. He turned out to be okay, got him back, took a day's rest, and continued down the journey. But all in all, just a great experience. People ask why, and we say, why not? Why not? When you get old, you want to have regrets, you want to have memories. And this is, stop right there.
Yeah.
Back one. Yep. This is great. This was not planned for. There's some people here today that when we got down the river, took us out and actually took us to William Ashley's grave on his land. And William Ashley is buried in an Indian mound, and they say standing up. And he also has on his property in his will a 5-inch strip from his grave to the Missouri River, because he said if he ever rose from the dead, he wanted to have the right of way to walk to the Missouri River. And that's not a story, it's in his will. And so they took us there, and they had a tent up, and they cooked us a fine meal. We spent some time at the grave and toured around, and it was just really, an honor for the three of us, and it's just something we didn't even know was coming. And these guys just planned it and put it all together out of the goodness of their hearts. So we fired a celebration volley into William Ashley, and toured Arrow Rock. If you haven't been to Arrow Rock, Missouri, you need to go. It's another great starting point. Santa Fe Trail to the west, you need to go to Arrow Rock. There's just a lot of great things happen along the way, and a lot of great people helping us out, and just the generosity overall was just fantastic. Excellent trip. Amish, do you want to add anything? You good, Jack?
Yeah.
Gerry's talking about Paul Fenowald that down here with the keelboat. Paul was an integral part of our trip. Going down the Missouri River, flooded as it was hard to find places to stop. Many times up the bank, there was no bank, it was just trees that we had to tie off onto, couldn't go onto land. But Paul would scout ahead for us. Here's a great picture too of that whirlpool that was done in a sketch. We could never catch one with the video camera. But Paul, for many miles, would scout ahead for a place he knew we could get into, because there was only one shot to get off on the river or you were swept by, because we didn't have the motor. 2 oars was not enough. And so Paul would also resupply us with food. So the captain lovingly gave him the camp name of Pathfinder. And at the end of the trip, the captain presented him with the flag of the Muskrat, and he was there when the boat was delivered to Herman the day after we finished the trip. I think there's a video here of the last 4 minutes before we float into St. Charles. It's near the end. We'll play that, and I think we'll be done.
Got my glasses on here.
It's kind of an interesting moment because...
Well, we don't want to see me.
That's my niece. When we started the journey in Lone Tree, we took off on the horses. That's Kim. It was very surreal because after 2.5 years, you're finally stepping off of the horses and you're thinking, wow, we got 2,000 miles to go, and we just were 100 yards from base camp, and now here we are, 3 minutes from landing, and we're all thinking, wow, we made it, But it was very bittersweet to end and go home. It was a great journey. Pretty uneventful landing, pretty safe. That was good. And the last landing of the keelboat muskrat ever. There she is. It's hard to see if you can see the picture. This is Jack's wife, Kim, and on the right, that's John Coulter's great-granddaughter. And we had just been to his memorial and grave 2 days before, and she shows up at random. So I guess before I take questions, what I would say is to everybody, it's never too late. Go do something crazy, It doesn't need to be this. It could be a motorcycle ride, it could be a horse ride, it could be hiking avalanche and trail or something. Go push yourself, go test yourself. That's all this started out to be for the three of us, and that's all it is and ever will be is, can we do this? Can we emulate 20-year-old guys in our 40s, 50s, and 60s, not me, 40s, 50s, 60s, yeah. Can we emulate those guys and do this journey? And that's all we had nothing to prove to anybody other than ourselves, and could we do it and make it? And if you have something like that in your mind that you want to go out and test and prove yourself, go do it. And don't should on yourself and look back and say, I should have done that. So, great journey and a lot of fun. We'll be here next year, probably get into some more detailed seminars on gear and equipment and some of the events on it, but I'll open it up to questions. Yes?
I just want you to tell them about the Facebook page in case they want to go and research it.
The what?
Facebook.
Oh yes, we also have a Facebook page called Ashley's Return, and you go on and you ask to be a friend of it, and then we approve you. We don't do that to be stinkers. We just do that because there's a lot of people that want to put ads on there, and we don't want ads and things. So, and you can put it in order by date, go down the bottom, and follow the entire journey all the way up. And then last year, starting on July 6th through October 8th, we posted our 3 journal entries each day, so you could see what we were thinking and what was going on. And then we're in the process right now. There's a lot more that happened and a lot more things that we just don't want to tell anybody until we put it in a book and get it all out there, get all the information out. So we're working on that. It's just, we're not writers. We tend to write the way we speak, which isn't great. So we're working on that. So questions on the whole journey? Yes?
What about the Facebook page, The Journey of the Keelboat Muskrat? Is that your Facebook?
It is, but it's a group that doesn't have everything on it. It's just called Keelboat Muskrat. Right?
Okay.
Kim?
And then I'm still...
Yep.
Okay, and then the Muskrat, the organization is called Muskrat Society.
Yep, the Muskrat Society.
And we encourage, everybody to join that, and obviously to consider joining because it's such great fun people.
Yep.
And I do want to add that their last stop was Washington, Missouri, and they were so friendly, and sometimes people are not as approachable, and they were so approachable, but I knew these guys had guts because they had a fire built on a wooden dock next to a wooden boat. And I'm like, they are the only people that have ever done that on our dock in Washington. Had a blazing fire going, and I try to tell people that, and I think I might have a picture somewhere, but nobody believes me. They're like, no. And I'm like, oh yeah.
It wasn't a brazier.
They had a fire going on the wooden dock next to the wooden boat, and that was their last night, was Washington.
Yep.
And so then I had the honor of being their fog spotter at Klondike, right down the road here.
Right.
Yeah, so, and then, tell them about the articles that are in the magazines.
Oh, yes. So if you talk to NMLRA, Rick Bagger or Amber in the back room, you can get last year, October, November, December, and January, February of this year, there's a 5-article series that we put together that's in the Muzzle Blast magazine that'll go down through and capture some of the highlights of the journey. So, questions? Yes, sir.
So did you ever get to the point where you got scarce on food, and what did you do?
On the scarcest that we got on the trip was on the horseback ride. There was a couple of days with no water. There was water for the horses, but it was just nasty alkali water and not drinkable, not filterable. So we had plenty of food that we carried along the way, but water was the issue on the ride. And then on the keel boat in the Missouri River, we didn't have water issues, but you have to carry water because it's not filterable, it's not boilable, it's not drinkable. That's the other thing Ashley didn't have to face is clean water issues. But no, I would say that every stop that we made on the keel boat, people probably gave us 20, 30 pounds of food. I mean, we had more than we could eat. They were so generous. Everything from apples to sweet corn to meat, fish, you name it. People brought it to us and just gave it to us. It was awesome. Other questions? Ask me something. How much time we got left, Bob?
Over here.
Yes?
Did anybody get sick on this thing requiring hospitalization? You get any dysentery from river water? Or?
No. So the three of us had 95 days in the ground, and not one of us even cut ourselves with a knife in camp. I got sick on the horse ride for about some kind of 24-hour bug, and then Dixon Barner, another guy on a horseback ride, got the same 24-hour bug, and he was sick. And then Bill Bailey, the captain, thought he was having a heart attack, and it was really just a stress attack and all that. We did send him to the hospital to be safe, and then he came back the next day. Other than that, I don't think anybody got sick. Nobody got dysentery. No Band-Aids were used in the making of this journey. Yeah. No. And that's a miracle in itself. I mean, anything could have gone wrong.
You have about 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes. Any other questions? No? Yes, Judy.
You have life jackets on board, but you didn't, obviously you didn't wear them, right?
Look, we did, yes.
Or they got bad.
Life jackets are part of the requirement. We did have them. They were covered with oilcloth or painted brown, but that's also a requirement to be on the Missouri River with a boat. Most of the time on the pirogues and the bull boat, we didn't wear them. They were always within arm's reach on the keel boat, and there were some hairy moments where we're all like, all right, boys, life jackets, and we put them on. But for the most part, they were within arm's reach. There's some things you want to recreate. Drowning in the Missouri River is not one of them. So, yes. Jack, anything? Josh? You good? Okay, if there are more questions, we appreciate it. Thank you.